It includes details on what Betsy Hackman was searching for before she died, and the first-person view of the officers as they found the couple dead at home. And when they bust through, on the other side, they find an underground chamber. They go through and they find themselves in a tunnel. On February 26, 2025, Santa Fe County Sheriff's deputies arrived at a gated hilltop compound in Hyde Park and made a discovery that would shake the world. What they found inside that compound and what the internet claimed they found would turn out to be two completely different stories. Within days of the news breaking, a video began circulating. It had a thumbnail. It had a title. It had 800,000 views and climbing. And it claimed that beneath Gene Hackman's Santa Fe estate, the FBI had discovered a secret underground tunnel. And inside that tunnel, 701 bodies. 701 bodies. Beneath a dead Hollywood Legends house in the hills of New Mexico. The claim spread across X, TikTok, and Threads like a brush fire. People shared it in disbelief. Others shared it as fact. Comment sections erupted. The story mutated, grew. By the time fact-checkers arrived, it had already been accepted as reality by hundreds of thousands of people. But here's what's genuinely strange about this story. It's not the tunnel that's fascinating. The tunnel never existed. What's fascinating is everything else. The real architecture of that house. The real sequence of deaths inside it. The real discoveries investigators made when they finally stepped through the door. Because the truth of what happened at One Old Sunset Trail is stranger and more haunting than any invented tunnel could ever be. And what it reveals about both Gene Hackman and the world we now live in is something that should stay with you long after this video ends. The story begins not with a rumor, but with a pest control worker. It was the afternoon of February 26, 2025, a Wednesday, when a maintenance technician arrived at a property in Santa Fe's gated Santa Fe Summit neighborhood, a hilltop enclave northeast of the city, elevated above the pinyon forests with views stretching clear to Colorado. The worker's job was routine, but something was wrong. The residents weren't answering. That was unusual. He knew this family. He flagged down a security officer patrolling the community. The officer approached the main residence, peered through a window, and immediately called 911. At approximately 1:45 in the afternoon, Santa Fe County Sheriff's deputies were dispatched to the property. What they encountered when they stepped inside would become, briefly, one of the most scrutinized and sensationalized celebrity death investigations in recent memory. Gene Hackman, 95 years old, a two-time Academy Award winner, one of the most respected actors of the 20th century, was found on the floor of the home's mudroom, his walking cane and sunglasses laid nearby. His wife, Betsy Hackman, 65 years old, a classically trained pianist and accomplished artist, was found on the bathroom floor. Their German Shepherd was still in the house. The dog, visibly distressed, had stayed close to the bodies. Sheriff Aiden Mendoza was direct at the press briefing that followed. The couple had been deceased for, in his words, quite a while, observed Mrs. Arakawa deceased. They continued the search of their home and located Mr. Hackman in a separate area of the residence. He declined to speculate on how long. He also declined to rule anything out. The circumstances, he said, were suspicious enough in nature to require a thorough search and investigation. The word suspicious landed hard, and from that single word, the internet built a mythology. The residents became concerned after receiving no answer and contacted neighborhood security. For weeks, the real investigation was methodical and quiet. For the viral internet, it was the opposite. But the actual facts gathered by the Santa Fe County Sheriff's Office, the Office of the New Mexico Medical Investigator, and one of the state's most experienced forensic pathologists, told a story that required no embellishment. The initial results confirmed the timeline. Then, the second round of analysis told a completely different story about how two people had died alone in a house no one checked on for nearly 2 weeks. To understand why the discovery at Gene Hackman's estate matters, and why the misinformation around it spread so explosively, you first need to understand what that property actually was. Hackman purchased the land in the late 1980s, drawn to Santa Fe after filming in the region. He described the area in a 1990 Architectural Digest interview as having a kind of magic in it. The property he bought was a neglected 1950s block structure on 12 acres of hilltop terrain. By the time Hackman and Arakawa finished renovating it with architects Harry Dapel and Stephen Samuelson of Studio Architectura, it had become something else entirely. It was a deliberate architectural choice to add interior volume without expanding the building's footprint. The result was a lower level, a subterranean zone that housed a gym, a media room, and a game room. all of it connected to the main house by interior passages. Add to that a hidden wine cellar accessed through the butler's pantry. Add to that a network of connected outbuildings, a full guest house with its own kitchen, a separate art studio where Hackman quietly spent his retirement years painting in oil. Add the fact that the property eventually expanded to 53 acres with garages and secondary structures scattered across terrain that naturally dips and rises. From the outside, standing at the gated entrance on Old Sunset Trail, you would see very little. Just a hilltop. Just stone. Just the outline of a massive private world built by a man who was, by every account from his Santa Fe neighbors, deeply committed to being invisible. He wasn't treated as a celebrity here, one neighbor told the Wall Street Journal. He was seen buying painting supplies at local art stores. He kept to himself. He was painting. He was reading. He was living quietly in a place designed to swallow him whole. That architecture, those subterranean passages. That wine cellar, that hidden lower level. That is what a YouTube channel called The Ultimate Discovery looked at and turned into a tunnel filled with bodies. The video in question was posted in early March 2025, within days of the story breaking nationally. The channel, The Ultimate Discovery, had made a practice of producing rapid turnaround content about celebrity deaths and conspiracy-adjacent topics. The title promised FBI involvement. The thumbnail promised horror, and the algorithm delivered an audience. By the time Snopes published its formal debunking, the video had accumulated more than 800,000 views. Snopes was unequivocal. There was no tunnel, no FBI investigation, no 701 bodies, no credible news outlet, not one, had reported anything resembling those claims. The video had been fabricated wholesale. If you're finding this investigation compelling, truly helps this channel keep following stories like this one. But here's what makes the tunnel video so worth understanding. It didn't appear in a vacuum. It appeared precisely because the real story had created conditions for it. The word suspicious from the sheriff, the delay in public information, the secluded, heavily fortified property, the subground architecture, the fact that 2 people had been dead for nearly 2 weeks before anyone checked on them. Real mystery, real ambiguity, and real grief are almost always the fuel for viral fiction. The tunnel didn't come from nowhere. It came from every unanswered question the official story left open. And this is the detail that keeps researchers who study digital misinformation up at night. The false version of a story is often more emotionally satisfying than the true one, because the true one is more complicated, more painful, and far less easy to share in a single sentence. The true one went like this. Betsy Hackman died first. The Office of the New Mexico Medical Investigator determined that she died on or around February 11th, 2025. The cause was hantavirus pulmonary syndrome, a rare and often fatal respiratory illness caused by exposure to rodents infected with hantavirus. In New Mexico, it is typically transmitted through contact with the urine, droppings, or saliva of infected deer mice. People do not catch it from other people. It moves fast once symptoms begin. Fever, muscle aches, a cough that progresses within days into acute respiratory failure. Dr. Heather Jarrell, New Mexico's chief medical examiner, stated at a press conference on March 7, 2025, that it was unprecedented for the Office of the Medical Investigator to make public statements about death investigations. She did so anyway, she explained, because the circumstances demanded accurate information. Rodent activity, it later emerged, had been discovered in the garages and outbuildings on the Hackman property. Exactly the kind of secondary structures that accumulate undisturbed on large rural estates. The virus had likely been present on the property without anyone knowing. Arakawa, by all accounts in good health and deeply engaged with her own creative life, would have had no reason to expect a mouse in a garage to be a death sentence. Hantavirus pulmonary syndrome kills approximately 38% of the people it infects. She was 65 years old. Hackman died approximately 1 week later on or around February 18th. His cause of death was hypertensive atherosclerotic cardiovascular disease, severe heart disease, with Alzheimer's disease listed as a significant contributing factor. He was 95. His pacemaker recorded an abnormal heart rhythm on February 18th, which investigators believe marks the moment he died. For a week, possibly longer, Gene Hackman had been alive in that house with his wife's body on the bathroom floor and his dog by his side and the mountains visible through the floor-to-ceiling windows. And nobody called. Nobody came because they were fiercely, deliberately private people who had spent decades engineering a life in which no one could simply drop by. Sit with that for a moment. Because what it reveals about who Gene Hackman actually was is more profound than any tunnel. To understand why no one came, you need to understand what kind of man this was. Gene Hackman was born in San Bernardino, California in 1930. He grew up in Danville, Illinois, the child of a broken home. He joined the Marines at 16, lying about his age to enlist. He spent years failing in journalism school, in acting, in New York before getting his first real break at age 37 in Bonnie and Clyde. He won his first Oscar at 41 for The French Connection, his second for Unforgiven at 62. 5 Oscar nominations total, a career spanning 44 years, 200 films, and then in 2004, he simply stopped. He moved to Santa Fe permanently. He began painting in oil, seriously, with discipline, not as a hobby. He ran, he read, he told one interviewer that the physical and emotional strain of acting had become more than he wanted to carry. He told another that he had tried and that was enough. He watched The French Connection once at the initial screening and never again. He told the New York Post in 2021 that he found watching himself on screen deeply uncomfortable. He did not grasp or did not want to grasp the scale of what he had built. His neighbors in Santa Fe bought that. They let him be. And that is why the silence of those final 2 weeks was not neglect. It was the result of a life spent carefully, deliberately constructing a perimeter. The architecture of the house, the stone walls, the elevated hilltop position, the gated community, the lowered underground rooms, the 53 acres of buffer was not just aesthetic. It was Hackman's psychology made physical. A man who had spent 40 years being consumed by public attention had built the most private possible retreat from it. Some scholars of celebrity architecture have argued that the homes of reclusive stars frequently mirror their emotional architecture. That a person who lives behind stone walls and below ground level has made a statement about how they intend to be found or not found by the world. Whether or not you accept that reading, the facts of the case lend it an uncomfortable weight. The pest control worker noticed something was wrong because the residents, who were always home, weren't answering. That was the only signal after nearly 2 weeks. There is one more discovery at Gene Hackman's estate that has received almost no attention. When the property was staged for sale in January 2026, listed at $6.25 million through Sotheby's International Realty, the real estate listing described the studio building. This is where Hackman had painted quietly for over 20 years after walking away from Hollywood. Bonhams auctioned his personal art collection in 3 parts across 2025. Among the highlights, a Milton Avery canvas that sold for more than $500,000, a painting by Hackman himself. His interpretation of Russian painter Philip Malievin's Peasant Women fetched $28,160. His Golden Globe for the Royal Tenenbaums sold for $51,200. His paintings sold not for their celebrity provenance alone. They sold because people who saw them recognized something real in them. The auction raised roughly $3 million in total. None of this was public while he was alive. The studio existed on those 53 acres for decades and no one talked about it. Hackman didn't talk about it. He just went there, mixed his colors by hand the way he had mixed the paints on the walls of the house during the renovation, trying to get the shade exactly right, trying to create something that looked like it had been there forever. That is the discovery no one expected. Not a tunnel, not bodies. A painter. A very old, very private man in an art studio in the mountains of New Mexico, spending his final years making work that nobody saw because nobody was supposed to see it yet. One controversial interpretation of the Hackman story, put forward by some media critics and scholars of celebrity culture, is that the viral tunnel rumor was not simply a lie. It was a symptom. It points towards something real about how the public processes the deaths of people who have been, for decades, a shared cultural possession. Gene Hackman belonged to everyone who ever watched The French Connection or Hoosiers or The Conversation. When he died quietly in a house almost no one had ever visited of natural causes in late winter, the world was denied something it felt it was owed. A story, a cause, a reason. His death had no villain, no drama, no scandal. Just an old man with Alzheimer's, alone with a dog in a house his wife had already left. If we take the viral response to his death at face value, the tunnels, the 701 bodies, the FBI conspiracies, it appears to point toward a profound cultural discomfort with private deaths. We expect the famous to die publicly or at least explicably. We want their deaths to mean something commensurate with their lives. When they don't, we supply the meaning ourselves. This raises the question of whether the misinformation around celebrity deaths is, in some sense, a form of grief, distorted, commodified, algorithmically amplified, but grief nonetheless. The tunnel video was watched 800,000 times. How many of those viewers had grown up watching Hackman? How many of them were trying, in the only vocabulary the internet gave them, to say that his death felt too small for the size of the man? That's not an excuse for fabricating stories. It's an explanation for why those stories find an audience. What remains of Gene Hackman is now available for $6.25 million. The house at Old Sunset Trail sits on the hill where he built it, mostly unchanged. The wine cellar is still there. The lower-level rooms are still there. The floors that were deliberately lowered to create depth without expanding the footprint, still there. The studio where he painted for 20 years, still there. The floor-to-ceiling windows still frame the same view of the Jemez Mountains he described as having a kind of magic. The listing agents, Tara Early and Ricky Allen of Sotheby's International Realty, have applied no celebrity premium to the asking price. They are selling it in there as a decent actor, he said in a GQ interview, as someone who tried to portray what was given to them in an honest fashion. And when they asked him to sum up his life in a single phrase, he smiled and said, "He tried." I think that'd be fairly accurate. So, we leave the tunnel where it belongs, in the imagination of an algorithm, in the fever dream of a channel chasing clicks, in the part of our collective mind that cannot accept that great men die quietly in mudrooms with their dogs beside them. And we leave Gene Hackman where he actually was, on a hill in New Mexico, painting alone in a house he built with his own hands in colors he mixed himself in a room no one was supposed to find. Is that not, when you think about it carefully, exactly what he was trying to tell us?